Welcome, everybody, to the Health Wrap. We're happy to have you with us. The pictures, Carla, tell only part of the story.
It does. You have just seen scenes from across the country for what has been the fourth night of protest because of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis after a police officer held his knee in his neck for nearly 9 minutes. You see these protests. We have a right to protest, but we have a hole in our heart because of all of the disruptions. What started out as peaceful protests have become explosive disruptions. And we understand why, because people are angry, people are tired of the injustice in the United States of America.
I said earlier this week that America has a human rights problem. And I said that because someone sent to me through Facebook a list of over 30 different instances. I'm not talking 30 people. These are at least 30 different instances. Among those are the case of Mother Emanuel, which is right down the street from my house. Mother Emanuel, as you know, was the loss of 9 lives. And so there is so much, I think, that is built up that people are looking for ways to let it out. And we're also looking for leadership. And we're pleased today to have with us one of those leaders who understands what this buildup is about and has been working for some years to try to figure out how we could come up with a solution in this country and live together. I'd like for you to welcome to our discussion today, Dr. Gail Christopher. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Christopher.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
I've known Dr. Christopher for a while. We started our association through the Conference to Eliminate Health Disparities some years ago, and then you were at the Kellogg Foundation, where you were actually heading up the America Healing Initiative to abolish racism. But as Carla noted at the very beginning, that seems to be our second pandemic that we're dealing with these days. Mm-hmm. I know you're now with the National Collaborative for Health Equity, and yesterday you all issued a pretty powerful statement. Tell me what went into going and putting that statement together.
Well, we, are an organization that's committed to ending health inequities, right? And so this idea of death, needless death, we had to respond to it because people of color are dying disproportionately from COVID-19. And in the midst of that, we have an acceleration of police violence, taking lives and arresting people of color. And so we were compelled to respond to that and to try and send a voice of reason, but at the same time to channel our anger. And I tried to embody that in the statement. This is about racism. This is about allowing the belief in our society, which shaped our society, by the way, that some people have value and others don't. We call it a belief in a hierarchy of human value, and it plays out in every system that we have, particularly in the legal system and in the criminal system. I hate to put criminal and justice together, although that's what we call the system. But we know for us, it has too often meant injustice.
Dr. Christopher, and we also know that there are some really good law enforcement men and women out there, and a lot of them have come forth, Black, white, Hispanic, and made statements about what has happened. But what we want people to understand, that just being an African American in America, every day there's something that you encounter almost every day. It may not be as severe as what George Floyd had to undergo, but just your very presence at work and at play, that things happen. What can you tell us as far as some of the things that we need to keep in mind and let people know? Should we have conversations with people? Because sometimes people don't understand, and then sometimes it's just ignorance.
I think, thank you, and absolutely. And I believe the increased vulnerability to COVID-19, as well as the increased vulnerability to the chronic diseases that make us face a greater risk for a lethal outcome with COVID-19. All of these are a reflection of the cumulative effect of the very thing that you're describing. If you go through your entire life feeling an assault, challenging your immune system, challenging your defenses, when something like this pathogen, this virus comes along, you've already weakened your system to the point, or it has been weakened by the environment in which you live. I believe that we have to first know how to work very hard to take care of ourselves, to make sure that, and some people call this blaming the victim. I think that's a mistake. I think we have to understand that at this stage in life, we have to redouble our efforts to have the best possible care we can, self-care, in terms of minimizing the consequences of chronic stress exposure. And a big part of that would be loving relationships in our intimate circles, making sure that we are affirmed and surrounded by people who care and demonstrate care for us. There is evidence that that changes the heart rate, that it enhances our immune system. So simply the emphasis on loving relationships and connection, that's a very important part of our resilience, if you will, in the face of the assaults. But we do need to work on healing our communities. We need to work on building relationships that defy the fallacy of racial hierarchy. Carolyn, you know, I've been doing this work for decades, and I know that there are good people in every profession. The police department, the medical professions, the academic professions, and we just have to expand those circles of people. If you look at these protest images, there are a lot of white people protesting, and that is a sign of progress for us. You know, 3 years ago, we would not have expected a charge of any kind against a police officer. Now we demanded and expected that, and we have it. It's not as what many of us would like, but there was a charge, you know. So I think we have to be reminded that this is a long-term journey and that we are making progress, and we have to continue to be determined that our descendants will not live in an environment that denies their humanity.
So you talked about the self-responsibility, and then you're also calling in the statement for there to be continued congressional, state, and local government action. What will that look like to you?
The Senate has to move on more relief for those who are victims of COVID-19. That's a beginning, right? We have to make sure that those dollars, our tax dollars, by the way, find their way to the people who need that support the most. What makes a community is often the small business, the economic viability of the local restaurant and the nail salon. And these are people who are not receiving the support that they need. We've eviscerated our early child care infrastructure in just this 2 months of shutdown, you know. So we need leaders who are looking at what makes up the fabric of a community and are channeling resources to help rebuild that fabric at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. We also have to continue the very courageous work that began under Obama's administration, and has been, you hear it being echoed by the police officers that are stepping up. I mean, there was so many incidents, as you mentioned in the early part of the program, of actual violence against people of color. And President Obama's administration responded to that. and pulled together an amazing task force, a 21st century policing task force. And many of the law enforcement officials in the country participated in that. And they came up with some very powerful recommendations for behavior, for training, for managing the excessive use of lethal force, preventing the use of lethal force. There are systems that we can put in place, but we have to be determined and not give up. I mean, I said to my daughter this morning, I said, the only thing that regrows after a major fire, the only structures that rebuild on their own are forests. When we start burning down the structures in our communities, it's possible that 50 years from now, they will still be vacant lots. That's what happened after the 60s riots. And so I know I might get pushback on this, but I would caution us to channel our energy into creating a new way forward and not destroy what exists today.
Thank you,
So
Dr. Christopher. Dr.
Thank
Gail
you.
Christopher from the National Collaborative of Health Equity. And we'll be checking in with you
Okay.
again. Thank you so
It's
much,
my
everyone.
Thanks for your leadership, Dr. Christopher. Thank
You're
you so
welcome.
much.
Thank you.
Some of the things you talked about, Carla, were some of those what they call social determinants. And people are going to hear a lot about that. We're going to be talking about personal responsibility, but it's important to be aware what those look like. And those social determinants are the things in your environment that affect how you feel. I think she covered it so well. But it's everything from your housing to, what is your neighborhood shopping center? Do you have a supermarket? Is it a food desert? Are you able to do some of the things she talked about in terms of being healthy and having healthy living and healthy eating? So we'll be talking more about that. We know as the last couple of nights have been so extremely intense, this has left a burden on a lot of parents to figure out, how do you explain this to your kids? I mean, you and I are old enough to have heard about Watts and covered some other stories in between, but how do you explain this to kids? Just last week, we were talking about graduation, and we were talking about families getting ready to send their kids away to school. How do you do that in this climate after seeing what we've seen this week?
Well, we have some parents that are going to join us now, and we're going to talk about just that. We have, hello, parents. How are you?
Hello.
There is Coach Ty Wilson from Nashville, Maplewood High School. We also have Lena Weathers Johnson from Atlanta, a mom, and LaShonda Hunter, the Charity Foundation. Welcome to all of you all who are not only Carolyn parents, they're also leaders in the communities, and they also work with young people as well.
Absolutely. Last week, I was shouting out LaShonda's name because I'm so very proud of what she has done. Not only her work with the Charity Foundation, but more importantly, her work as a mom. And her son, Nash Hicks, is on his way to Atlanta to be what we call in our house a Morehouse man. We're so thrilled about that. Yeah, go ahead. You can do it. Woo! Wanted to talk about what does that mean, LaShonda, as you're getting ready to send him away from home and everything that's been happening this week? We were watching the CNN Center last night, smashed, windows smashed, and people trying to protest outside of it. What is it? What goes through your mind when you see this?
Several mixed feelings. For my son to be accepted into Morehouse College, it's a really exciting time in his life, but also we're faced with the juxtaposition of also facing a global pandemic. And so there's, on one side of things, we are ready to celebrate. At the other side, we can barely, he can't have normal hangouts with his friends or celebrate in the same way. As far as the riots are concerned, we're fortunate enough to attend Charity Missionary Baptist Church, where our pastor is Reverend Nelson B. Rivers III, and we're taught social justice on a regular basis. So we understand the importance of teaching the history and culture of where they came from, why it's important for them to fight for justice and fight for their rights, and let it be known that they're equal and they shouldn't be treated less than anyone else, especially their peers. My son has friends from, I call them the United Nations, but that brings some concerns to me whenever they go out, because I understand that he's the Black boy in the group. And I've had to have those conversations with his friends and their parents, because event of an altercation, their children are going to go home at night with no issue, and their concerns aren't necessarily the same as mine. There was an incident one time where one of his friends had a missing tail light, and I mentioned it to him, and he said, "Oh, I'm not replacing it right now. I'm just being rebellious." And I immediately had to talk to his parents and let him know that my son would not be riding with them until he addressed that issue, and also the importance of what that privilege looks like, that his son has a choice to walk around or drive around with the missing tail light, whereas here in Charleston, South Carolina, Walter Scott was gunned down because of a missing tail light. And so those are the kind of conversations that we have to have. We're fortunate enough to where my son does have friends of different backgrounds where we can start those conversations and actually open up that door so that we can really reveal these hard discussions and they can understand what it looks like to be a Black man.
Lena, you have sons, you and your husband Ron, and you also work with young people and mentor young people. What are some of the boys right there? Huh? What are some of the concerns that you all have?
Well, first and foremost, we are concerned all the time. Did you lose me?
No, we hear
No,
you.
we got you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
First and foremost, we're concerned all the time. I have a 3:00 a.m. call time where my body just instinctively gets up and goes to the window to see whose car is there. And then I can go back to sleep peacefully. But we are concerned, and we've taught our kids early on, not just our kids, our neighborhood kids. We do a Boys to Men retreat where we focus just on this. What do you do if you're stopped? What do those steps look like? Because oftentimes nobody ever teaches our kids this. They don't get taught that. And so when they get in the situation, we were looking at a video yesterday about a young man who was being followed in Texas, and he was sitting in his car for 6 minutes because he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to respond. And so, we have the responsibility to teach our kids that. Number one, you get your hands where they can see them. Number two, you keep the lines of communication open so that if your wallet is on the floor and he says, "Let me see your driver's license," you don't go reaching on the floor until you communicate with him, "Hey, my license is on the floor. I need to either reach down and get it, or I need for you to get it for me," right? Number three, be responsible in your language. No slang. Yes, sir. No, sir. These are the things that are going to keep you safe. And our kids, our young men get so caught up in not being a punk. Well, would you rather be a dead punk or an alive punk? I know what I vote for. I'm the mother of a child who's no longer with me. So I know what I vote for.
So
and it's about changing the mentality.
I understand you all had a discussion in your household last night about one of your sons wanting to go to Memphis and take part in the protest. How did that go?
Yes. And, fortunately, my kids were in the house with us last night. We were having this conversation as we watched everything unfold. And, they want to protest. They want to protest. But as a mom, understanding how explosive things get, it is my responsibility and my husband's responsibility to influence that behavior. Because we were talking earlier, you can't tell a 22-year-old what you can't do, because that's going to make them want to do it that much more. So you have to influence that behavior. And I influenced it quietly through prayer last night. And this morning I was, getting him prepared mentally for what might happen. And he said, "Well, I think I'm just going to stay put." Prayer answered. Power of prayer. Thank you.
I'm hearing a theme here, and that prayer helps.
Right. Coach Ty, you have a son and a daughter, and you are also very influential in boys' lives because of being a high school coach.
Yes.
Let's walk through some of the things that you have to tell your young men.
It's interesting hearing what these women have to say. And the first thing that came to my mind is what MLK, Dr. Martin Luther King says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And one thing that we do with our guys every year, we go to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. I want them to know the history, get some background of what happened before us, you know, whether it's talking about the Freedom Riders or we're talking about the Civil Rights the Civil Rights movement, or even just boycotting itself. So we go through a variety of things every year, just like you said, just going over survival rules. Because I do the same thing as Laura said. I want them to know survival rules when they encounter a police, and you know, just being respectful, number one. And like she stated, it's not about being a punk. It's just about being humble. You know, being submissiveness, and also avoiding contact with that police officer so they don't feel like you're threatening them. And also showing your hands, showing that if you need to reach for your wallet or you need to reach for your registration, that you dictate the narrative. Tell them what you're actually doing so they'll know that this is what I'm actually doing. I'm reaching for my wallet. I'm reaching for my registration to my car. So I have those talks with those guys all the time, even my own kids. My daughter and I were riding yesterday because all this is going on, and it's got a lot of people fearful, and it has a lot of people. It's getting us in a place that we need to think about what's next and how do we overcome certain situations in this hostile environment. And I asked her a question. I asked her, does she think she ever experienced racism? My daughter goes to a school where it's multicultural. She has white friends. She has friends of all backgrounds. And it was interesting. Her answer was pretty much, she said she felt like the only time that she's experienced it, because she dances. And she says she felt like she has to go the extra mile in working harder when it comes to dancing, because that's an area surrounded by a lot of white kids, and she feel like that's where the white privilege actually starts. And I just told her it's gonna happen, but you know, you keep working through it and keep overcoming it. So she's very aware. My son is very aware of just all the survival skills that needs to take place.
Have you told her that you, as a state champion, award-winning coach, you still have to work extra hard than
Yes.
other people too as well?
Yes, all the time. The school that I'm at is a predominantly Black school, inner city school, and so I may not get the same privilege as some of the white coaches per se, but I'm always trying to demonstrate and show my guys what hard works look like, what ethics look like, what character looks like. And so therefore, if they see it, they'll duplicate it. They'll try it. You know, even if you fall, you know, you still continue to try, continue to work harder, continue to try to build a legacy for yourself. So I'm all about just trying to help the next generation, especially when it comes to this police brutality and the things that our Black men see.
Well, it sounds like it's working, Coach, and we're happy to hear that. I guess as I'm listening to you all, I'm thinking, and Carla said this at the very beginning of the show, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, if you had to explain it, how much of your time are you spending on the pandemic in terms of getting them to wear a face mask and wash their hands and stay healthy and stay 6 feet away? How much time do you get to spend on that versus how to just stay alive? It sounds like it's a 50-50 proposition, or more time spent on staying alive.
Lena?
That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. We have masks all around the house. You know, you tell them when they run out, grab a mask. Don't forget to grab a mask, take your sanitizer. But there is so much more time spent on teaching our young Black men how to stay alive. Mm-hmm. And it's not a COVID-19 stay alive. It's a police officer with a gun stay alive. And so it is a pandemic. It is in and of itself, it is just unbelievable of what has happened and what's transpired just in the last few weeks, the last few months. It's incredible. And so each time you have to go back, and the best thing that's worked for us, especially on our retreats, is situational learning. You put them in 4 chairs, that's their car. You have this person who's the cop. You have this person who's the lawyer. This session is actually run by a defense attorney, and he uses real case studies with blacked out names, but we role play that. We do situational learning with them so that they can see how it feels and they can practice the language that they need to have availably ready if something were to happen.
Mhm. Just
Now,
pick
go
just
ahead.
piggybacking
Go
off
ahead,
of what
Coach.
just piggybacking off of what she's saying. One thing that we teach our guys, and I call it CIA. We teach them about consensual encounters with police. We teach them about investigating encounters with police and an arrest. And so they're knowing the difference between consensual encounter where you ask the police officer, "Am I free to go?" You know, and they need to know that. You know, where if it's an investigation situation, that means they have probable cause. Just because we talked about where the Supreme Court made decision Terry versus Ohio. You know, we just talked about how that came about. And then, of course, an arrest, it means they pretty much can detain you for that moment because they have probable cause. So we talk about those things that may hinder them or that they'll see at one point in their life.
It's a lot.
Shonda?
And education is a huge piece of that. Like you said, having those conversations with your children. But also, I think that we need to monitor the amount of, I call it trauma porn, that we're exposing our children to. As Black people, we already have been exposed to so much over the years. If I don't see another Black man or woman shot online again, I'm good. I've seen enough. And I think that we need to step back. I think Dr. Christopher said it beforehand. We need to make sure that we're doing things to instill self-care within ourselves. If we need to unplug for a day, if we need to read a book, read our Bible, sit and pray and meditate with our children, those are the things that also are going to balance out the amount of fear and hatred that is being spewed into their lives on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Thank you all for what you do,
Yes.
you do in terms of raising good citizens. Gives us hope for the future. We know it's a challenge, and as you all were, each of you were talking, I was thinking what you just said, Nashonda, and that is, I hope you are doing your own self-care. I was paying attention, Lena, when you said you're getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but I hope you all are doing your own self-care to take care of yourselves. Be well. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you,
Thank
parents.
you for having us.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's been one of those weeks, Carla. I tell you, you contacted me yesterday and you said, "Are you watching CNN?" And I was going to a meeting, but we watched what we think of now as one of our colleagues. And in this case, this young man, Omar, is actually the son of my high school classmate. And you could see on the left, he was arrested. You can see on the right, his headshot that is used for promotional purposes at CNN, but arrested on national or international live television as he tries to cover what is happening in Minneapolis. If we look at our reporter's notebook this week, that's one I don't think you and I ever were arrested. We might have come close, but never put in handcuffs.
Right. And I was, when I called you, I was looking at it live, and at first I was in disbelief, and so were the anchors, because they're looking at it. And he's narrating the scene saying, "Officers, we will do what you want me to do." So he's there, he's got his crew there. It was 4 of them. And then I kept listening over and over to what the police were saying. And it was like they really, for some reason, didn't believe he was with CNN, because they said, "We need to make sure you're with CNN," and words like that. And I'm like, okay, so he's a tall, young Black man. There are 3 other people here, producers,
Look at the
photographers.
credential right there. You see the credential?
That's what I'm saying. And we have credentials as media people. All you have to do, he's tall, his badge is there at his waist. And look at the credential. That's all they had to do. Fortunately, the governor immediately, when he heard about this, asked them to release him. But I went on to Twitter, and I was reading, I was like, they were saying, well, once he was identified. was
Well, I
released.
said to his mother, Jane, that when I first saw him Thursday night, late in the evening, covering from the location, I said a silent prayer because I know that being on the front line as an essential worker, as a journalist, is no joke. But we deserve the respect and the protection that we need in order to do our jobs. And I told her, I said a prayer then, and I believe that we'll continue to pray and he'll continue to be protected as he tries to do a really tough job. You know, this was the week that the UN even came out and said procedures must change. The United Nations said they must change. Prevention systems must be put in place. And above all, police officers who resort to excessive force should be charged and convicted for the crimes committed. Some tough statements. I suspect that we will see continued activity as people press for justice and press for change in this country.
Change and for a whole blanket covered over this illness that's going on, because it is an illness, because it's spreading. We've got COVID-19, but we've got to do, as you said, we've got to change minds, change hearts, and then most of all, change behaviors. Carolyn, it's been a great show, and it's time to go. And we thank you all at home. Stay safe, stay alive.
See you next week. Thanks, Carla.